Frances Haugen est sortie de l'ombre avec fracas. C'est elle, la lanceuse d'alerte à l'origine des Facebook Papers, une fuite massive de plus de 20 000 pages de documents internes qui a fortement ébranlé l'empire de Mark Zuckerberg. L'audition au Congrès américain de cet ex-employé de Facebook a ensuite marqué les esprits.
My name is Frances Haugen, but I'm here today because I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy.
Son message est clair, limpide, percutant. Le plus important réseau social au monde fait passer ses profits loin devant la sécurité de ses utilisateurs. Le jour même, malgré les preuves accablantes, le grand patron nie tout. Ce n'est tout simplement pas vrai, écrit-il. Rien pour arrêter Frances Haugen. Au cours de la dernière année, l'experte en algorithmes a été invitée aux quatre coins du monde pour présenter ses preuves.
Nous ne sous-estimons pas le courage qui vous a été nécessaire pour dénoncer au grand jour les actions de votre ancien employeur qui allaient contre vos convictions les plus profondes.
Ce pavé dans la mare lancé par Frances Haugen a assombri encore plus le passage à vide dans lequel se trouve l'entreprise Facebook, rebaptisée Meta, également propriétaire d'Instagram. 11 000 de ses employés ont été remerciés cette semaine, alors que sa valeur en bourse a récemment atteint son plus bas niveau en près de 4 ans. De passage au Canada en octobre pour rencontrer des élus fédéraux, Frances Haugen a accepté de nous parler.
Frances Haugen, bienvenue. Welcome to the Décrypteurs. First off, I want to know, how are you? I mean, how you've been, and how could you describe the year you've been through since you came out as a whistleblower?
It's been a whirlwind, I gotta give you that. I think the world was hungry to find out what was actually going on Facebook. Right, that for a long time, people had that feeling that something was wrong. You know, Facebook would come out and kind of bat away any activists who raised issues, but it feels really satisfying to learn the truth. And I think people were really grateful to actually know that their kids were in danger. Something was happening. You know, there was instability that was being contributed to by Facebook.
How would you characterize Facebook's actions since then?
You know, it's interesting. It's kind of like they're listening, but it's like they don't hear the core of the message, right? So some of the one of my core issues was around the role of Facebook in less stable places in the world and their underinvestment in safety for other countries. And they have done things. You know, they rolled out the No Language Left Behind program, which covers 200 languages. But you know, there's like 4,000 or 5,000 languages in the world. And so it's like they're hearing some of it, but at the same time, you know, they're not actually doing things to change their products in meaningful ways. You know, they're not giving kids more tools to help themselves escape the algorithm or to moderate their own usage, because those things would go against their business model.
And coming back to the language issue, why is it such a pressing issue? Could you give us some examples of how far it can go when you don't monitor enough in certain languages in certain places in the world?
So really quickly, back in 2018, Facebook went from trying to just keep you on the site as long as possible to using you in the system to provide encouragement to other people so they produce more content. So when you put a comment, when you put a like on something, your friends make more content. And so they started saying content that gets more interactions is better content. But unfortunately, as Mark Zuckerberg himself said, engagement-based ranking is dangerous because we are drawn to click on, to engage with more extreme content.
He said it publicly.
He said it. It's in a white paper. It's from 2018. You can tell that as soon as they made the change, they started realizing some things. And political parties on the left and the right in Europe, within 6 months of that change, they started reporting, we know you changed the algorithm. Because it used to be we could share something like a white paper on our agricultural policy. It's not the most exciting thing in the world.
I agree.
But we could see from the stats, people read it. People spent time with it. Now, if we put out the exact same content, it's crickets. Now, if we don't run extreme positions, things that we know even our constituents don't like that much, they don't get distributed. That's one thing in a place like Europe or in France or in Canada, where there's a lot of stability, right? We have a lot of social capital, history around democracy. But when that goes into countries where maybe Facebook basically is the internet, 80 or 90% of the content in the world on most languages is only found on Facebook. When you start giving disproportionate distribution to more extreme ideas, that can lead to violence.
Wow. And why do you think it's so hard for Facebook or Meta now to implement those changes you're asking for?
Great question. If we don't focus on content, we can focus on product design. In the case of Facebook, there's little changes they can make. Things like saying, before you share a link, you have to click on it. Like, it's not enough for it to come into your feed and then have you spread it on. You have to click on it before you reshare it. Because that doesn't deal with content, it deals with behavior. It works in every country in the world. Or imagine something shows up in your newsfeed and it came from someone beyond friends of friends.
Yeah.
Imagine if you said, hey, you don't know this person. You can still say whatever you want, but you have to copy and paste it to share it. That is the same impact as the entire third-party fact-checking program, but it works in every language in the world.
That's interesting.
So the reason why they don't do these things is they reduce the amount of content in the system by just a little bit. And that means you stay on Facebook a little bit less long. And that means you click on a little fewer ads.
Okay.
And so their incentive is to have as much content flowing as freely and fastly through the system as possible, because they make more money.
It's all about the business model.
It's all about the business model.
Is there any model we should follow right now in the world in terms of legislative pieces to replicate?
So one of the things that's exciting about the form that Canada's law has taken is it's borrowed a lot of really successful models from the Digital Services Act, which is the law that Europe passed earlier this year.
Okay.
So the Digital Services Act focuses on transparency. We have the right to know what's happening on these platforms. We have the right to know what we're putting in our minds. And it focuses on companies having to engage in a process of discussing risk. Just a month before the first articles came out covering my disclosures, the Senate gave a deadline to Facebook saying, hey, let's level with each other. We know something's going on with kids. You need to tell us what you know. And instead of sharing any research, Facebook came back and wrote them a 6-page letter saying, we're not going to give you anything. And because we didn't have laws in place in the United States that compelled Facebook to share risk information, the conversation ended there until my disclosures came out. And what happened with that was we discovered Facebook had a lot of research that was about kids online. Things like interviews with children where they said kids consistently use an addict's narrative to describe their usage of social media. They say, it makes me miserable. I can't stop using it. If I leave, I'll be ostracized. Like, that's pretty unequivocal.
We're all wondering what's going on inside Mr. Zuckerberg's mind. How should we see the governance?
Great question.
The style of governance they have at Facebook, I mean, the higher levels of Facebook, there must be, beside you, some kind of dissent right now.
I have a huge amount of empathy for Mark because he has spent his entire adult life the CEO of Facebook. He started when he was 19. People told him for 10 years that he was the savior of humanity. Like, literally in 2016 in April, they were throwing parades for him in the streets in Africa because he was like the man who brought the internet to Africa. And then fast forward 6 months later, and people are saying Facebook is ruining democracy. It is almost impossible for a person to hold in their mind the idea that they might be responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. And so right now, we're all being held hostage by the fact that Mark has surrounded himself with people who reassure him that everything is fine, right? That he is actually the only responsible one in the room because he's protecting freedom of speech. When in reality, the things that I'm talking about, like that larger set of the pie beyond content moderation, that doesn't touch freedom of speech. But he doesn't want to even think that his products might be hurting people because it's so hard. Facebook and Mark are the same thing now in his mind.
We might have the impression that algorithms are intrinsically bad, and we have to imagine a different model based on something else. Algorithms can bring some good aspects of our online life.
I think the real conversation we need to be having is what system of incentives, what system of accountability do we need to put the algorithms within? Because this is just like cars. The automotive manufacturers for years knew about seatbelts, they knew about collapsible steering columns, they knew about airbags, and they didn't put them in their cars. This sounds crazy. It was 20 years between when we had the first car with a seatbelt and being legally mandated to put seatbelts in every car. And it's one of these things where these companies know ways of doing these products in safer ways, but unless we make the incentives, things like forced transparency, they're not going to be incentivized to act in responsible ways.
That's true for Facebook. I think it is even
More true
for TikTok.
Yeah.
You were guessing what I'm. My next question. I mean, with ourselves, we've seen in the last year. I mean, the amount of influence TikTok has, and their algorithm seems to be really potent and powerful. And how worried are you about
TikTok?
TikTok, yeah.
So TikTok makes no user promise to you. The only promise they give you is we're going to inspire you to watch another video. It's going to be so good, you're going to want to watch another video. And that means that they can do a number of things behind the scenes that may not be obvious. And there was a period of time a couple years ago where they were taking down every person who was visibly gay or visibly disabled to protect them from being bullied. So the reason why this is so scary for me is right now we're not really talking about Kenya's influence on those really fragile, vulnerable places in the world. But we saw this summer with the Kenya election, the first time incendiary content on TikTok was provoking people to conflict. And I'm expecting to see all the things we've seen with Facebook in Myanmar and Ethiopia turn out far, far worse with TikTok.
And finally, we have many Facebook users listening to this interview. What would be the single advice you would give them to have a secure, online experience on Facebook?
I think for everyone, if you have kids, I strongly encourage you to sit down with your kids and talk to them about the business model, to talk to them about doom scrolling and the importance of actually realistically understanding how much you're using these systems. Most phones now have time spent features. Actually see how much time do you spend on social media. Ask yourself, is this how I want to spend time in my life? Do I want to do 3 hours a day? Do I want to do 30 minutes a day? I'm not an absolutist. I'm not going to say you need to get rid of your social media. But I do want you to live mindfully with social media. I want it to be a tool for you, not you. I don't want you to be a tool for them.
Frances Haugen, merci beaucoup. Thank you a lot. Hope to see you soon.
I hope so too.
In Montreal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care.